Today, Hinxton Hall and the Hinxton Hall estate form the foundations of the Wellcome Genome campus. Hinxton Hall is a conference centre which, as part of Wellcome Connecting Science, hosts a range of learning and training events. The origins of the hall, its ownership and building, have always been complex, but this year, 2023, we discovered a lot more about its history, including its connection to the East India Company. The significant history of Hinxton Hall begins with the purchase of the estate by the Holden family in 1745. The Holden family were deeply involved in the East India Company. Founded in 1600, the East India Company received a royal charter signed by Queen Elizabeth I. Its purpose was to undertake trade in India, Southeast Asia and China, mainly focused on cotton, indigo, porcelain, tea and silks. Holden was both a shipowner and a captain for the East India Company for 20 years, between 1711 and 1730. He captained two East Indiaman sailing ships, Mary 6 and Mary 7, which were designed to carry both passengers and goods and were armed to defend themselves against pirates. East Indiamen usually sailed between England, the Cape of Good Hope and India, where their primary destinations were the ports of Mumbai, Chennai and Kolkata. This journey could take 6 months or more, with an equivalent time for returning home. Sailing this route in the early 1700s was perilous. There were no accurate tools or instruments for navigation, and instead sailors relied on their own knowledge and experience to avoid being shipwrecked. There were significant risks of illnesses such as scurvy, and if the crew survived all of those things, they may still be attacked by pirates or enemy ships at any point on their journey. But for those who survived these trading journeys, the rewards were huge. When Captain Holden died, he left a fortune to his family, amounting to millions of pounds in today's money. His daughter, Mary Holden, inherited a sum of around £12,000 in 1731, which equates to around £30 million today. Extensively carved and decorated Indian furniture made of ebony was brought back to Britain in large quantities by East India Company officials, and Mary was also left an Indian bureau, an Indian card table, 6 Indian chairs and 2 Indian dressing boxes by her father. Although we don't know what happened to these items, there are many examples of similar furniture in collections across the UK. A few years after her father's death, and at the age of 16, Mary Holden married John Bromwell Jones. After the marriage, most of the hall's main construction took place. The building of Hinxton Hall was partly, if not wholly, funded from Mary's fortune from her father's East India Company activities. The political, cultural and financial impact of the East India Company on British society was huge during this era, through the building, purchase and furnishing of houses such as Hinxton Hall, to the fueling of British textile manufacture in the Industrial Revolution. This impact continued through the development of the British Empire. It is clear that the East India Company had an indirect link in the development of the Wellcome Genome campus today, a fact that we should all recognise and remember. Almost 100 years after the Holden family financed the building of Hinxton Hall, the Green de Freville family set about expanding the hall in accordance with the fashions of the early Victorian era. Edward Humphreys Green de Freville added a range of features, including the highly decorative Pompeian room. On his marriage to Julia Flower in 1846, she brought with her substantial wealth from her own family connections. Julia was the granddaughter of the first Duke of Cleveland, who owned 233 enslaved people on the Lowther plantation in Barbados. Following the abolition of slavery within the British Empire in 1833, he received £4,854, 16 shillings and 9 in compensation from the British government. This equates to around £6 million today. The generational wealth held within the de Freville family enabled them to enjoy a very comfortable lifestyle, in the countryside with several servants, as well as at a home in Mayfair in London. Their wealth also enhanced the local village of Hinxton, through economic and social philanthropy, repairs to the village church, and Christmas gifts for local children. At the time the extended Holden family were living in Hinxton Hall in the late 1700s, many people in England and in the local community in East Anglia were questioning how enslaved people on British plantations were being treated. Enslaved men, women, and children in the Caribbean and Americas were performing backbreaking labour, growing crops of sugarcane, tobacco, and indigo under constant threat of violence and death. Forcibly removed from their own homes, they endured equally horrific conditions while being transported to the New World. Despite Britain's leading role in transatlantic slavery, many people in the UK felt strongly enough to actively campaign against it. Beginning in 1783, this was called the Abolitionist Movement. Saffron Walden and Cambridge, both within a few miles of Hinxton, were significant centres of anti-slavery abolitionist activity. Many drew on their Christian beliefs to drive their campaigning and were part of established nonconformist and Quaker communities in this region. In addition to these local abolitionist campaigners, others in the movement were formerly enslaved people who told their own stories through books and public speaking events. Oluda Equiano was one prominent figure associated with the campaign to abolish slavery. He was probably a member of the Igbo community in today's Nigeria, and was captured and transported to North America as a child during the 1750s. Here Equiano was bought by Michael Henry Pascal, a lieutenant in the Royal Navy, and renamed Gustavus Vassa. He was bought and sold by a number of owners over the course of around 10 years, working as part of a ship's crew on voyages between Britain, Europe, and the Caribbean. In 1766, at the age of about 21, he was able to buy his freedom for £40, equivalent to around £6,000 today. As a free man, Equiano continued to work as a sailor, including an expedition to the North Pole. He eventually settled in Britain in the 1780s, and wrote about his life and experiences of slavery in The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Oluda Equiano, or Gustavus Vassa, the African, which was published in 1789 and became a bestseller. The financing of this publication was supported by the prominent abolitionist campaigner Peter Peckard, the Master of Magdalen College at the University of Cambridge, and by others including Reverend Joseph Gwenap, a Baptist minister in Saffron Walden. In 1792, Oluda Equiano married Susanna Cullen, a woman from Soham in East Cambridgeshire. The couple lived in the area and had 2 daughters. Sadly, Susanna died aged 34 in 1796, and Equiano died a year later in 1797. Their older daughter, Anna Maria, also died that year at the age of 4. The only surviving member of the family, Joanna, inherited her father's estate when she was 21. Joanna married Reverend Henry Bromley in 1827, and they moved to Clavering near Saffron Walden, where Henry served as a minister at the Congregational Church until 1845, when he retired. In many ways, the presence of Joanna Bromley, living within 12 miles of Hinxton, represents the significance of this region in both the history of British slavery and its abolition. By delving deeper into the colonial history of Hinxton Hall, we can see how this rural part of South Cambridgeshire had a complex range of connections, from its direct relationship with the East India Company and the British Empire to its location within a centre of abolitionist activity. Hinxton Hall was a witness to some of the major social and political movements that took place in the UK through the 1700s and 1800s. This film is one part of recognising our shared history and how it has affected our place as individuals and as Wellcome Connecting Science in a global society.